The most deadly coral disease outbreak in history is a lesion that develops and causes tissue loss across the surface of coral colonies until no living tissue remains. It is called Stony coral tissue loss disease. In the 2022 Mesoamerican Reef Report card, Belize's score dropped from 3 in 2020 to 2, indicating a state of poor reef health. Belize's country coordinator for Healthy Reefs Initiative, Nicole Craig, says the decline is due to reduction of both commercial and herbivorous fish biomass and the disease.
Interestingly enough, coral cover increased by 1%, but when you break that down and look at the species composition, the different types of corals that make up that increase, we actually see a change in the types of corals that are now dominating our reefs. Stony coral tissue loss disease, we believe, has a lot to do with this because of the species that it affects. Starts as a small lesion, a little white spot that's appearing on the coral colony itself, and that little white spot or lesion just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so what we were doing initially was putting all these different materials around or surrounding that lesion to see if it would continue to spread, and it did. The species that we typically see stony coral tissue loss disease affecting are actually the larger reef building corals, the ones that really contribute to shoreline protection. These are the big boulders, the brains, and we don't see as many of those on a reef anymore. We're seeing a lot more of the smaller, thinner, like lettuce coral on our reef instead.
In southern Belize, amongst the Silk Keys, Fragments of Hope founder Lisa Karn indicated the crisis was first recognized in the USA.
A bunch of people panicking because it is such a deadly disease and it affects over 25 different stony coral species, the ones that actually build the reef. And so there was a lot of scrambling with a lot of folks in Florida and other parts of the Caribbean that have more resources than Belize and other island nations may have. And they looked at lots of different treatments. But let me explain, the problem with this is we don't know what's causing the disease. So even with something like COVID, you understand the terminology where they identify the pathogen, and they were able to identify the COVID pathogen as a virus that kept mutating while we had to keep getting different vaccines. But in the case of almost all of the coral diseases, we don't know the pathogen. So if we don't even know if it's bacterial or if it's virus or what, it's kind of a guessing game, right?
Commercial vessels may contribute to the spread from their ballast water. Ballast water is seawater held in tanks and holds of ships to manage drift, trim, and stability. Ballast water is then taken up in ports or while in transit. Microbes, including bacteria and viruses, is carried in ballast water, which may be taken up and commingle across a variety of locations, including the Caribbean. Stony coral tissue loss disease has not only affected areas in the south off the coast of Placencia, it has also reached the Lighthouse Reef Atoll, which is, of course, the UNESCO World Heritage Site, the Belize Blue Hole. The Blue Hole is within the Lighthouse Reef Atoll, and Belize Audubon Society's marine biologist Gabriela Ugarte says the organization has documented the disease within the atoll.
In September of 2020, when other surveys were being conducted at Lighthouse Reef Atoll, the team saw what they thought were signs of stony coral tissue loss disease. And so images were taken and those were sent in for confirmation. We conducted rover diver surveys in which we predetermined 12 sites. And within those 12 sites, approximately 4,000 coral colonies were assessed. Of that 4,000, approximately 16% showed signs of stony coral tissue loss disease, and then 11% of those showed 100% mortality due to the disease.
Members of the Coral Reef Monitoring Network, Nanon Martinez of UBERI and Nicole Craig of Healthy Reefs, discussed the issue.
So what happened with stony coral tissue loss disease, even though we were trying to plan and prepare, you really can't plan and prepare for something you don't know that's going to happen. Like, this really came out of nowhere, just like COVID-19. It's like, we don't really know what we're doing, but we're going to try to do our best. We only got out about 4 times in the whole year. Now, stony coral tissue loss disease, as you know from your study that you did at Goff's Key, it can kill a coral in 4 to 6 weeks. So if we're going out 4 times a year, that's probably 3 months. Whatever we treated, it could have been dead already, and we didn't even know.
Before the disease got to Belize, we met as a network. The network's called the National Coral Reef Monitoring Network. And we talked about our options. We talked about what it is that we can do, how much money do we have, how many people do we have, and we decided that we would try a couple things that were a bit cheaper first. So things like cement, epoxy, Even cocoa butter, we tried to put on these corals to see if the lesions would continue to spread. But unfortunately, they did. And so we realized we might need something a bit stronger. The antibiotic itself it comes in powdered form. And so we needed something to help the antibiotic stick to the coral itself. And so there's this company who creates this compound called Corarex Base 2B. And they're in the US. It's a very expensive product, actually. And so we had to apply for funding to help us source it, but we were able to do that and get some of that here in Belize. So once we got the product, we could mix in that powdered antibiotic and then apply it directly to any lesion we saw on colonies.
Is it an uphill battle or is it low cost? I mean,
I don't think the cost is a consideration given that we know the value of the coral reefs, right? And they're worth millions, billions when you really look at the shoreline protection, when you look at the economic value for tourism and things like that and fisheries. But what is problematic is that we cannot, there's no way we could treat every sick coral. And so it certainly is depressing and it does feel like an uphill battle when you go out there. And my opinion, it hasn't completely changed, but my thought is that at the end of the day, there will be survivors. And while it's a very sad situation, given the fact that we can't treat them all and we don't know the pathogen, I think we need to focus our future efforts on identifying the survivors of this disease and then working on how we can propagate more of those. But on the other hand, when you see some of these big, hundreds of years old, big, beautiful brain corals, you want to save them, right? But it's been really frustrating because the species that has been affected the most is the pillar coral, which already was pretty endangered. They're very iconic looking. They look like their name, big pillars, and they're one of the stony coral species where the polyps are out, so it looks like carpet, like really, it's very beautiful then, and it's very different looking than the other corals. So the other frustration was that same species was the hardest one to treat because of their morphology, meaning the polyps are out, the treatment wouldn't stick very well on them. So it was super frustrating that the ones who wanted to save the most, the application didn't work so well on. So they work a lot better on the brain corals. It's much easier to treat the brain corals.
Conservation partners in the Coral Reef Network didn't have readily available financing or a solution, but they needed both. They received a glimmer of hope through a funding partnership between the Great Barrier Reef Foundation and the Belize Coastal Zone Management Authority and Institute. Ninon Martinez, the Marine Program Manager for University of Belize Environmental Research Institute, UBERI, sheds light on the significance of this funding collaboration.
Coastal Zone Management Authority and Institute has a reef resilience initiative, and they got funding from the Great Barrier Reef Foundation to do something to respond to these types of threats. Because we have these unforeseen reef threats, we, UBERI, along with TASA, Coastal Zone, and the Fisheries Department, got together and wrote a proposal to kind of see what can we do to respond, how can we prepare better. So we had that problem of partners and members of the NCRMN not having money, not being able to go out. So we thought, okay, what if we tap into another resource like our stakeholders? They're out on the reef every day. What if we approach our stakeholders to see, hey, are you willing to respond, and can they respond in the same way that we would? So this whole project that we have, a big part of it is training stakeholders to respond to stony coral tissue loss disease as they're out on the reef. As they see it, they can do it.
What are the benefits of having the stakeholders directly involved?
They're already there. They're there every day.
They're already there.
They're already there.
And the truth is,
I need to put gas in my boat, write a memo, and all of these things before I can go out in 2 weeks when
they're already there.
When Pedro's literally going out in his boat tomorrow to the same spot I'm trying to go.
Well, the fishermen have been very helpful in that process. They were the ones that at the beginning of this disease breakout would reach out to our rangers at Lighthouse, at Half Moon Key specifically, and inform them, because the fishermen were not 100% sure of exactly what was affecting our corals, but they definitely knew that something was wrong. So they were very influential in that process of identifying sites or identifying spots that actually had the disease.
Yeah, when I have my lead time and these guys stop in on the island here, because most of the time here, we have a lead feedback on some areas that I might know and they could visit and see the diseases themselves, you know.
When we meet the rangers, we always do that. When we see something strange, we always tell them, you know what, we see this and that in the reef or in some way in the patches, and they say, okay. We always tell them.
Yeah, I always look out for the stony coral tissue disease. So I've pretty much been to the sites where all these sites are pretty much where the disease are, but also other sites I normally go to, then I always try to come out and tell the guys over, it's like, hey, just, take a look around the area, see if maybe some of the areas you've worked before, and then maybe if it's a new site, then you can target a new site where you can avoid more spreading of the disease itself.
So one of the first things we're going to do is hire some staff to be the point people, to do the training, to communicate with the stakeholders, be like, hey, how are things going? Where do you think you're seeing the disease? Do you need help? Feedback, all of these things. So communication is the most important line in this whole thing. Mm-hmm. One thing we really want to do is train them to use the AGRA tracking tool, which you taught us about, which was super cool, where anybody anywhere can just be like, hey, I think I saw a disease, take a picture, upload it online. And if it's tour guides, they can show their guests, hey, if you're going to be going on another tour in another atoll, then they can also do that and upload it, and it can be verified by AGRA, so we could see how the disease is spreading, like how quickly. And this is what we hope you can do about it too.
Fishermen go to these areas across the sea daily, are an important set of eyes as the first line of defense to changes in the sea. But how effective is the core RX space to be?
Corals don't always get better. So we did a small study in front of Gov's Key, and we were working at 3 different sites. And at these sites, we treated 80 colonies. And after observing them for 90 days, we found that over 70% of them we considered successful because we did not need to reapply treatment more than twice. But of course, the remaining 30%, when we went back, the lesion continued to spread, so we considered that unsuccessful. What we want to know in the future is what happens on the long term, because 90 days is a pretty short period of time. And so beyond that, what happens? So we're expanding our study in Glover's Reef to see what happens after 6 months, after 1 year. And that study is ongoing. We just established that site a month ago.
Treatment was done at our hotspots along the atoll. So those being closer to Half Moon Key Wall, and some areas around the Blue Hole, given that those are our highest tourist destinations. We saw that the disease simply stopped spreading. If you see, you don't necessarily see growth of the coral. It's not a recovery process that we were observing. It was more just, okay, the disease itself has stopped spreading on this colony. Well, we're looking at the best ways to address stony coral tissue loss disease. We keep current with our yearly reef health surveys, just to keep track of coral cover all along the atoll. We keep track of our benthic cover, our fish presence. So those are things that we keep track of, we keep current with, and we try to keep in our program for as long as possible.
The perspective of the fisher shed light on the complexities surrounding the blue economy and the challenges faced by coral reefs. It is defined as a sustainable ocean-based economy comprising of a range of economic sectors and related policies that aim to foster economic growth and social progress while maintaining the health of our oceans and coasts.
Blue economy. When you hear about blue economy, you only could know that rich people is, is, like I tell you, trying to control it when you hear about blue economy.
Blue economy problem because the one fishermen out of the sea, and that is a bad thing right there with us. It affects us a lot, They want to put reserve, they want to put all them kind of things, and that can work for we fishermen. They don't work for we benefit, right? They work different. They want we out of the fishing, and what we'll do with our family. We need fishing to sustain our family. If we no fish, we no bring money right there. That's our earning, that's our life.
They're affecting us really in sometimes their decision that they do, like having to have more reserve.
Feel like another PUP.
Blue economy, I think that the government, when they say they help the fisherman, but we do wait for seed.
While some express skepticism and concerns about the potential impact on their livelihoods, others recognize the importance of protecting marine ecosystems and embracing sustainable fishing practices.
Well, we haven't heard much about the blue economy, but something that I know is for protect the species that we have.
One word that caught to my mind, blue economy, is a better future for we. It sounds like, I'm not sure.
Normally, I look at blue economy as like pretty much a big generation of more protected areas, like protecting more environments.
One of the main contributors to the depletion of corals is us humans, right? We are the biggest threat in any ecosystem.
There are many multifaceted challenges faced every day by the reef, including the impacts of climate change and other man-made problems such as ship groundings on the barrier reef system. It is important for more government-led financing and effective solutions to protect the reef and the blue economy that depends on it. Assis Sanchez reporting.